Have you ever considered that Jesus was not alone, and that behind him stood brothers by blood, whose stories history quietly pushed into the shadows? Their names appear only briefly in the Bible, then vanish in unsettling. Who were they? Why are they mentioned so rarely compared to the apostles? Within Jesus' own family, there were tensions, doubt, and even silent opposition. Overlooked accounts and rarely taught details begin to connect, forming a picture that is both surprising and deeply unsettling. If you think you already know everything about Jesus, prepare yourself. This story may challenge what you thought you believed, and its ending may leave you unable to look away. Have you ever considered the untold stories, the quiet voices often lost in the grand narratives we hold so dear? We speak of heroes and their extraordinary journeys, but sometimes the most profound testament to their lives comes from those who knew them best. Those who walked closest, yet initially understood them least. Today, we embark on a journey to uncover such a story of brothers, sisters, and the transformative power of a truth so profound it turns skepticism into unwavering devotion. We often envision Jesus as a solitary figure, perhaps surrounded by 12 disciples, or occasionally his mother, Mary. But imagine for a moment the bustling, humble home in Nazareth. Picture not just a mother and a son, but a family, vibrant tapestry woven with the threads of everyday life, shared chores, and the unique dynamics of siblings. Yes, Jesus had brothers. Not metaphorical brethren, not distant cousins or step-siblings, but biological brothers. James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. He also had sisters. Though their names are not recorded, they were undoubtedly part of this close-knit family unit. This truth, often overlooked or reinterpreted in traditional narratives, is the bedrock of one of the most powerful stories of faith you will ever hear. They grew up together, these sons and daughters of Nazareth. Their childhood wasn't one of privilege or grand visions, but of sun-baked dust, the scent of olive groves, and the rhythmic rasp of saws against wood. Their hands, like Jesus' own, would have been calloused from the demanding work of a carpenter's shop. They shared meals, laughter, and the inevitable squabbles that come with close quarters. They knew the weight of responsibility that fell upon a family in their time and placed the constant effort to put food on the table, to maintain their home, to live a life of integrity within their community. But even then, there was something different about their eldest brother, Jesus. He wasn't like other boys. While they might have indulged in youthful mischief or fleeting angers, Jesus seemed to possess an innate calm, a profound wisdom that belied his years. He was innocent as the scriptures suggest, not merely in the absence of sin, but in a deeper, purer sense. Imagine the pressure this might have put on his younger siblings. How do you measure up to a brother who seems to embody perfection, who never seems to stumble, who looks at the world with an understanding that feels far beyond your own? It must have been both inspiring and, at times, perhaps a little frustrating. He was their brother, their fellow carpenter. Yet, there was always an unbridgeable quality about him, a quiet majesty they couldn't quite articulate. Then came a pivotal moment that irrevocably altered the course of their lives. The death of Joseph, their earthly father. In a culture where the eldest son carried the mantle of family leadership upon his father's passing, this tragedy placed an immense burden squarely on Jesus' shoulders. He became the head of the household, responsible for his mother and his younger siblings. He provided, he guided, he protected. For years, he fulfilled this role with quiet dedication, shaping wood and shaping lives within the walls of their Nazareth home. But the world had a larger plan for Jesus, a destiny that extended far beyond the confines of their village. When he finally departed, leaving the familiar scent of sawdust behind to begin his public ministry, it must have felt like an earthquake within their family. The head of their household, the one who had taken up their father's mantle, was suddenly gone. Can you imagine the mix of emotions? Confusion, perhaps a touch of resentment, and a profound sense of abandonment. They needed him, they relied on him, and now he was out there, speaking of a kingdom, performing miracles, gathering followers. News of Jesus' growing fame would have filtered back to Nazareth, carried by travelers and curious neighbors. Reports of astounding healings, radical teachings, and ever larger crowds. For James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon, this must have been incredibly disorienting. This was their brother, the one they had shared a bed with, the one whose hands they had watched splinter wood, the one who had just a few years prior been responsible for their daily bread. How could Jesus, the miracle worker, the prophet, be the same quiet carpenter they knew? Their initial reaction was not one of awe or immediate belief, but of profound doubt and even alarm. They knew him too well, or so they thought. They had seen him grow up, witnessed his ordinary life. How could he suddenly be claiming such extraordinary things? They openly challenged his claims, questioned his authority, and even, at one point, tried to intervene, believing he was out of his mind. Imagine the scene: his family, concerned and perhaps embarrassed by his growing notoriety and unconventional behavior, arriving to seize him, to bring him back home, to restore him to what they considered sanity. They saw a brother who had lost his way, not a Messiah revealing the way. Their love for him was real, but their understanding was profoundly limited by their earthly perspective. This initial skepticism of Jesus' own brothers is a crucial, yet often downplayed, aspect of the story. Why? Because over centuries, theological shifts began to diminish their role. The doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity, which posits that Mary remained a virgin throughout her life, led to reinterpretations of the biblical accounts. To maintain this doctrine, Jesus' brothers and sisters were often recategorized as step-siblings from a previous marriage of Joseph, or, more commonly, as cousins. Yet, the simplest and most direct reading of the original Greek and Hebrew scriptures supports them being biological siblings. The texts speak of brothers and sisters in the same straightforward manner they refer to Jesus' mother. This historical and theological debate, however important it became, inadvertently obscured the powerful truth of their journey. It made it easier to overlook the profound impact of their skepticism and subsequent transformation. But it is precisely their intimate knowledge of Jesus, their shared history, and their initial, fierce disbelief that makes their eventual conversion so incredibly powerful. They were not distant observers, easily swayed by charisma or rumor. They were family. They knew his every habit, his quiet moments, his human struggles. And yet, for a time, they could not see past the carpenter's son to the Son of God. They knew him best, and yet they understood him least. For now, the seeds of doubt were deeply sown in the hearts of James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. They were bound by blood, but separated by belief. Their journey from skeptics to unwavering pillars of the early church is one of the most compelling testaments to the resurrection, a story that demands to be heard. How could such profound disbelief transform into absolute, unshakable faith, even unto martyrdom? The answer lies in the extraordinary events that followed. Events that would shatter their preconceived notions and reveal a truth far grander than they could ever have imagined. We will delve into that astonishing transformation in our next chapter. We left off with the profound truth that Jesus owned biological brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon were initially his fiercest skeptics. They were not distant observers, easily swayed by charisma or rumor. They were family. They knew his every habit, his quiet moments, his human struggles. And yet, for a time, they could not see past the carpenter's son to the Son of God. They knew him best, and yet they understood him least. For now, this intimate knowledge, this shared history, is precisely what makes their eventual conversion so incredibly powerful. A testament to a truth so undeniable it shattered their preconceived notions. Imagine their upbringing in Nazareth, a small, unassuming village carved into the Galilean hills. Their days were filled with the rhythms of a simple, hard-working life. The scent of sawdust and fresh-cut timber would have permeated their home, for like their father Joseph, Jesus and his brothers were carpenters. Their hands would have known the rough grain of wood, the sting of a misplaced hammer blow, the satisfaction of a perfectly fitted joint. They shared meals, chores, and the everyday struggles of a humble family. They watched Jesus grow, a brother among brothers, yet subtly different. Perhaps it was his quiet intensity, his unwavering moral compass, his refusal to partake in youthful mischief. While other boys might have tested boundaries, Jesus, the eldest, seemed to walk a path of unblemished innocence. This very perfection, while admirable, might have inadvertently created a chasm. How do you relate to a brother who seemingly never falters, never succumbs to the same temptations? It could breed admiration, yes, but also a quiet resentment, a feeling of inadequacy, or even suspicion. They saw him as human, undeniably so, but perhaps too good, too detached from the common failings that bound them all together. They lived under the subtle, unspoken pressure of having an innocent older brother, a standard they felt they could never quite meet. Then came the seismic shift in their lives, the death of Joseph, their earthly father. In that culture, the eldest son, Jesus, would have immediately assumed the mantle of responsibility, becoming the head of the household. The care of Mary, his mother, and his younger siblings, James, Joseph, Jude, Simon, and their sisters, now fell squarely on his shoulders. It was a sacred duty, a bond of unwavering commitment. The carpenter's shop, their family's livelihood, depended on his steady hand and leadership. But then, Jesus made a choice that must have felt like a profound betrayal, an inexplicable abandonment of all he was expected to be. He left. He walked away from the carpenter's bench, from the daily grind, from the sacred duty of providing for his family. He began his public ministry, a calling that seemed to them utterly impractical, even delusional. How could he leave them? How could he forsake his responsibilities for what appeared to be wandering sermons and controversial claims? For his brothers, this was not a spiritual calling. It was a dereliction of duty. It was an act of profound selfishness from the man they knew as their elder brother. They had seen him as a carpenter, a son, a brother, constrained by the same earthly realities as themselves. Now he was claiming to be something more, something divine, something that flew in the face of everything they had known about him. The carpenter's son, suddenly a prophet. The man who shared their humble home, now claiming to be the Son of God. It was too much to reconcile. As news of Jesus' burgeoning ministry reached Nazareth, it wasn't met with pride, but with a mixture of skepticism, embarrassment, and perhaps even outright anger. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" people would whisper. "Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And aren't all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things? Matthew 13:55-56. The familiarity bred contempt, or at least profound doubt. They were too close to the human Jesus to accept the divine one. They couldn't see the Messiah because they could only see their brother, the one who had once eaten at the same table, shared the same chores, and perhaps even argued with them over trivial matters. Their doubt was not merely passive. It was active, vocal, and deeply concerned. At one point, their apprehension reached a peak. The crowds surrounding Jesus were growing, the controversies escalating, and his teachings becoming increasingly radical. From their perspective, he was not just making outlandish claims. He was jeopardizing his own life, bringing shame upon their family, and, most alarmingly, appearing to lose his mind. The Gospel of Mark recounts a truly astonishing incident. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." Mark 3:20-21. Imagine that scene. James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon, along with their mother Mary, arriving at a house where Jesus was teaching. Not to support him, but to seize him, to forcibly bring him home. Their intentions, though misguided, were likely rooted in a desperate desire to protect him, to restore him to what they considered sanity, to save their family's reputation. They genuinely believed he was losing his grip on reality. This wasn't just casual skepticism. This was a family intervention, born of deep concern, but also profound disbelief in his divine claims. They saw a beloved brother veering wildly off course, not a savior embarking on his sacred mission. This moment underscores the depth of their initial resistance. They weren't just questioning. They were actively trying to stop him. They embodied the ultimate challenge to Jesus' identity. If even his own family, those who knew him best, believed him to be deluded, how could anyone else be convinced? This historical account of Jesus' biological brothers, their shared life, and their initial fierce skepticism is crucial. Yet, as we touched upon in the first part, their role in the narrative was often diminished over centuries. The theological commitment to the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity led to various reinterpretations of these biblical passages. To preserve the idea that Mary remained a virgin throughout her life, the brothers and sisters of Jesus were reclassified. Some traditions suggested they were step-siblings from a previous marriage of Joseph, while others proposed they were cousins, using a broader interpretation of the word brother, adelphos, in Greek. However, the simplest and most direct reading of the New Testament texts, particularly in their original Greek, consistently points to biological siblings. The language used for Jesus' brothers is the same as that used for other siblings throughout the Bible. Without any qualifiers, that would suggest a different relationship. To deny their biological relationship is to introduce an unnecessary layer of interpretive complexity, often driven by later theological doctrines rather than the plain sense of the scripture itself. And it is precisely this plain sense that makes their story so compelling. They were not distant relatives. They were brothers who shared the same mother, the same home, the same childhood memories, the same Nazarene dust on their feet. Their doubt was personal, intimate, and deeply ingrained. It was the skepticism of an outsider, but the incredulity of those who had witnessed his entire human life, from infancy to manhood. They could reconcile the carpenter's son they knew with the miracle worker and divine claimant they were now hearing about. Their journey was one from profound familiarity to profound faith, a journey catalyzed by events so extraordinary they would shatter all their preconceived notions. Their initial disbelief, far from weakening the narrative of Jesus, actually strengthens it immeasurably. For if those closest to him, those who knew his human fallibility or perceived fallibility better than anyone, could be convinced, then the power of the resurrection must have been truly overwhelming. The stage was set for the ultimate test of their faith. Jesus continued his ministry, facing increasing opposition, ultimately leading to his crucifixion. His brothers, still wrestling with their doubts, must have watched in horror, perhaps even with a sense of grim vindication. We told you he was out of his mind, yet, even in their despair, a seed of something new was about to be planted. The darkest hour was upon them, but it was precisely in that darkness that the most brilliant light would soon erupt, transforming their skepticism into a faith so fierce it would redefine history. The path from Nazareth's carpenter shop to the leadership of the early church was about to be paved, not by easy belief, but by the shattering reality of an empty tomb and the undeniable presence of a risen Lord. We will witness that astonishing transformation and the incredible impact these once skeptical brothers had on the nascent Christian movement in our next and final part. The air hung heavy with despair. The crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, the man they had known as brother, as the carpenter, as the one who claimed to be the Son of God, must have been an agonizing spectacle for James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. Their initial skepticism, perhaps even a sense of grim vindication, "We told you he was out of his mind," would have quickly curdled into a profound, suffocating grief. The one they had grown up with, shared meals with, argued with, was gone. His movement, his claims, his life, seemingly extinguished on a Roman cross. The darkest hour, indeed, had fallen upon them, casting a long, cold shadow over their Nazarene memories. But as the sun set on that Sabbath, a new dawn was about to break. One that would not merely illuminate their world, but utterly shatter and reforge it. The empty tomb, the whispered rumors, the breathless accounts of Mary Magdalene and the other women. And then, the undeniable reality: he was alive. The impossible had happened. The man they had known, the brother they had doubted, stood before them, not as a ghost, but as a resurrected Lord. This was the pivotal moment, the cataclysmic event that transformed everything. For these brothers, who had known Jesus in his full humanity, who had seen him stumble and sweat, who had heard him snore and laugh, the resurrection was not just a miracle. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof. Their skepticism, forged in the crucible of shared childhood and everyday life, now crumbled before the sheer, unassailable fact of a risen Christ. The scriptures tell us that Jesus appeared specifically to James. Imagine that encounter. What words were exchanged? What tears were shed? Was it a moment of profound apology from James, or a tender reassurance from Jesus? We can only speculate, but the impact was undeniable. This singular, personal appearance to his brother James was not just a comforting reunion. It was a commissioning, a transfer of conviction so absolute that it would redefine James's entire existence. From that moment, the carpenter's son from Nazareth was no longer merely his brother. He was his Lord, his Savior, and the very Son of God. This transformation was not just personal, it was foundational for the nascent Christian movement. James, the older brother who had once tried to seize Jesus, believing him to be mad, now became a pillar of the early church in Jerusalem. His journey from doubt to unwavering faith made him uniquely suited for leadership. He understood the Jewish law, the traditions, the expectations, having lived them his entire life. Yet, he had also witnessed firsthand the revolutionary power of his brother's teachings and, most critically, his resurrection. James quickly rose to a position of immense authority within the Jerusalem church. He was known for his piety, his strict adherence to the law, and his profound wisdom. He became a bridge, a vital link between the traditional Jewish believers and the burgeoning community of followers of Christ. His leadership was not merely administrative. It was spiritual and theological, guiding the early believers through complex questions of identity and practice. Perhaps his most significant moment came at the Jerusalem Council, recorded in the book of Acts. The church was facing a monumental crisis. Did Gentile converts need to become Jews first? Did they need to be circumcised and follow all the Mosaic laws to truly be followers of Christ? It was a question that threatened to tear the fledgling movement apart. Peter and Paul presented their arguments, recounting God's work among the Gentiles. But it was James who, after listening to all sides, rendered the decisive judgment. With wisdom and authority, James declared that Gentiles did not need to be burdened by the full weight of the Mosaic law. Instead, he proposed a few essential prohibitions: abstaining from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. This decision, coming from the leader of the Jerusalem church, Jesus' own brother, was revolutionary. It opened the doors of faith wide to the non-Jewish world, preventing Christianity from becoming merely another sect of Judaism. James, the brother who had once struggled to believe, now shaped the very future of a global faith. His authority was so great, in fact, that it even caused a public confrontation between two other titans of the early church, Peter and Paul, in Antioch. Peter initially ate freely with Gentile believers, embracing the unity that Christ had brought. However, when certain men from James arrived, Peter, out of fear of displeasing them and the conservative Jewish faction they represented, withdrew and separated himself from the Gentiles. This act of hypocrisy caused Paul to confront Peter publicly, as recorded in Galatians. This incident strikingly underscores James's immense influence. Even Peter, the apostle to whom Jesus had entrusted the keys of the kingdom, felt compelled to modify his behavior out of respect, or perhaps fear, of James's perceived expectations and the authority he wielded within the Jerusalem church. But James was not the only brother to rise to prominence. Judas, another of Jesus' biological brothers, also left an indelible mark on the New Testament. He penned a powerful, urgent letter, simply known as the Epistle of Jude. In it, he passionately warns believers against false teachers and apostates who had infiltrated the church, corrupting its message and leading people astray. His letter is a fiery call to contend earnestly for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. What is particularly fascinating about Jude's letter is his unique approach to illustrating his points. He draws from non-canonical Jewish texts, such as the Book of Enoch and the Assumption of Moses, to underscore his warnings. This reveals a deep familiarity with Jewish tradition and a willingness to use diverse sources to defend the purity of the Christian message. Imagine Judas, the brother who shared a childhood with Jesus, now writing with such conviction and spiritual authority, urging believers to remain steadfast in the faith he once struggled to embrace. His letter is a testament to the radical transformation wrought by the resurrection. And then there was Simon, the fourth brother. While less is recorded of him, historical sources indicate that Simon also became a leader within the early church. After James's martyrdom around 62 AD, Simon succeeded him as the bishop of Jerusalem. He guided the community through one of its most tumultuous periods, the First Jewish-Roman War. which culminated in the horrific destruction of Jerusalem and its temple in 70 AD under Simon's leadership. The Christian community in Jerusalem wisely fled to Pella, preserving their lives and their faith amidst the cataclysm. Simon continued to lead the Jerusalem church for decades, eventually suffering martyrdom himself under the Emperor Trajan, reportedly being crucified at an advanced age, perhaps even over 100 years old. The stories of James, Judas, and Simon are not mere footnotes in Christian history. They are powerful, living testimonies to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. These were not casual acquaintances or distant admirers. These were men who had lived with Jesus, who had eaten at the same table, shared the same family burdens, and had initially dismissed his claims. They had seen him as merely their brother, the carpenter's son. Yet, after the resurrection, their skepticism shattered. They became fervent, unshakable believers. Why is this so significant? Because their transformation from close-knit skeptics to zealous martyrs is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the truth of the resurrection. People do not willingly die for a lie they helped concoct, nor for a delusion they once dismissed. They die for what they know to be true, for a reality so profound it redefines their very existence. James, Judas, and Simon, along with countless other early Christians, faced persecution, torture, and death, not for a theory, but for the living, breathing reality of a risen Lord, whom they had personally encountered. Their willingness to sacrifice everything, even their lives, for their faith, stands as an enduring, powerful testament to the undeniable truth of Jesus' triumph over death. Yet, despite their foundational importance and the undeniable impact they had on the early church, the story of Jesus' biological brothers was over time diminished and even obscured. As the centuries progressed, theological shifts began to emphasize the perpetual virginity of Mary, Jesus' mother. This doctrine, while deeply held by many, created a theological tension with the plain scriptural accounts of Jesus having brothers and sisters. To reconcile these, alternative interpretations arose, suggesting these brothers were actually cousins or step-siblings from a previous marriage of Joseph. While these interpretations were born from a desire to honor Mary, they inadvertently sidelined and muted the powerful testimony of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. Their unique journey from intimate skepticism to profound faith, a journey that so powerfully validates the resurrection, became less prominent in traditional narratives. But the simplest and most direct reading of the New Testament continues to present them as what they were: Jesus' biological siblings. Their story is not just a historical curiosity. It is a profound source of inspiration. It reminds us that faith is not always instantaneous or easy. It can be a long, arduous journey, even for those closest to the divine. It shows us that doubt, when wrestled with honestly, can lead to an even deeper, more resilient faith. The brothers of Jesus teach us that even those who knew him best in his human form, those who saw his mundane moments, were ultimately overwhelmed by his divine reality. Their lives, transformed from carpenters and humble Nazarenes to pillars of the early church and martyrs for the faith, echo across the millennia. They remind us that the call of Christ is so powerful, so transformative, that it can turn the most fervent disciples. Their legacy is a call to courageous faith, to unwavering conviction in the face of adversity, and to the profound truth of the resurrection. They are a testament to the fact that no matter our background, no matter our initial doubt, a genuine encounter with the risen Lord can transform us, utterly empowering us to live lives of purpose, impact, and ultimately eternal significance. The story of Jesus' brothers is, in the end, a story about the boundless power of God to turn doubt into destiny, and ordinary lives into extraordinary testaments of faith. May their journey inspire us all to embrace the transformative power of Christ, just as they did, and to live lives that echo the profound truth of the empty tomb. The story of Jesus' brothers offers a deeply human and realistic perspective on the journey of faith. In the Bible, they do not always appear as unwavering believers. On the contrary, there were times when they doubted, felt confused, or did not yet understand or accept his mission. This reveals that even within a holy family, differences in understanding and belief can exist. Yet, it is precisely this silence, distance, and moments of not believing that highlight the power of love, patience, and faithfulness. Over time, as they witnessed Jesus' life, his sacrifice, and his resurrection, some of his brothers were transformed, becoming witnesses and pillars of the early Christian community. This story reminds us that faith does not always arrive instantly. Sometimes it requires time, experience, and even trials to grow and mature. A deeper lesson and how to apply it: do not rush to judge others when they do not yet believe, do not understand, or are not ready. Practice patience, live with integrity, show love, and lead by example through your actions. In modern life, this approach helps us build stronger relationships, respect differences, and trust that meaningful change takes time. A question for you. In your opinion, what is the most important factor that helps a person move from doubt to faith? Please kindly share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can learn from different perspectives. And don't forget to subscribe to the Everyday Vital Path channel to support the channel and help inspire more thoughtful and meaningful content in the future.